All right, so welcome everyone to our last OER adopter chat for Open Education Week here at UNO. Throughout the week, we've talked to people from a number of different disciplines, and we're wrapping things up here with a chat with two composition instructors who have similar education backgrounds, but have moved into composition into different areas. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. For those of you who could not attend today and are watching this asynchronously, as you have figured out, I have placed the videos up online to be able to watch this conversation later and hopefully get some insight from professionals who have recently done this kind of work. And so yeah, on that note, I will go ahead and Jill and Thom, do you want to introduce yourselves, your backgrounds, and what you're teaching, and the course that you did an affordable content grant for?
Sure. I'm Jill Quandt. I'm in the English department. So my background's in English, but also in education. And I am teaching my Comp 2 class OER and my US Cultures in Literature class OER. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I'm Thom Davis. I have my master's degree in English from UNO, and I teach in the College of Information Science and Technology, which is, my kind of unicorn presence in the land of STEM, which I love because even computer science majors need to know how to write, and I teach the advanced composition for IS&T course, which I taught. I began teaching it as a graduate student in my last year in the English department. And then I moved into a part-time status. And then they created a full-time faculty position for me in 2019. And I've been there since then, and I love it. And it just goes to show that everyone needs to know how to write. And that's why I like it.
Awesome. Thank you both for joining us. And yeah, it was really nice. Thom, I remember when we met and we had that first conversation a couple of years ago, and it made me feel a little bit less like a unicorn because I also came from an English background. I have my master's in English, and then by way of information science, moved into being a STEM librarian. And so I already felt a little bit out of place, but I was like, hey, there's more. There's more of us here who have sort of made that migration. So the first question that I always start with, and y'all can answer this in whatever order that you like, which is also, it's predictably the first question that I get from faculty who are doing an affordable content grant, is where do I start looking for stuff, right? And that it can be a very simple answer, and here's some links of some databases to look for, but then you actually get into the search process and sort of assembling that initial kind of like draft library of things that you might want to be able to implement into your courses. So what was that like for you? Can you describe your process of locating the kind of like initial population of resources to look for, and kind of how you aggregated them, and strategies, I guess, that you found to be useful, or that you developed, or conversely ended up really not panning out. You can go a number of directions with it.
Go ahead, Jill. Oh, she's muted.
Sorry. Okay. I started, I think, by thinking about what I was doing before I moved OER, like basically what I needed to replace. And then I had a sense even before I moved OER that all of the things in my textbook I was currently using would exist for free on the internet somewhere. And so I felt a little bit guilty making students pay for that book. So really, I think I just started by making a list of what I was actually using from the book. And then I went to go find maybe a similar thing in the databases. And I really used the Canvas page or module or whatever it is, where it is the OER best bets, I think Craig made. I don't know if you want me to, share my screen or not, but there's a
Oh, sure.
OER best bets page. And so that's just where I started. And first I was looking for a textbook to replace the textbook I was using. And then to me, it was easier to find like individual chapters or articles. And then as you start exploring, you find things you need that you didn't know you needed. And it just really was kind of the going down this rabbit hole of the OER best bets.
So what was the book that you were using? Like,
I was using a textbook called Everything's an Argument.
Mhm.
And it's good. I like the book. I don't but a lot of the stuff was pretty basic. It's a intro kind of level course, Comp 2, it's a gen ed. And so there's a million chapters on things like the rhetorical situation and a million books. And so it was pretty easy to find. And then that book also has like example articles and text. It's all about argument. And I was able to find better articles using OER or things that I thought my students would be interested in. Because
So
you have the freedom to find out what they care about,
yeah.
and to choose things that are super current. So now we're all talking AI, everything's AI.
So yeah, so the textbook then would have like an example essay or an example
Right.
piece for students to read. So that is, I know often when people are assembling these kind of listed collections, in many ways, well, especially for findings Creative Commons licensed, like creative nonfiction and examples of writing, can be more difficult than, say, finding a Creative Commons licensed textbook for a number of disciplines. So to what extent, well, one, did you find that to be the case? Did you have to sort of mix like, okay, we did find some openly licensed materials, but then there's also materials that you just kind of have to like provide a link to because they're all rights reserved. Like, is
Yeah,
that
I
approached it?
mean, I used a lot. I have a mix. Some of the stuff that I link out to, I mean, a lot of my articles, if I'm looking for example essays or example arguments, if they were creative nonfiction, I'll get them from an open journal that's publishing online, or I use a lot of New York Times
Mhm.
articles. And so my problem was never finding information. My
Mhm.
problem was I found too much. There is everything and more. And so it was just deciding what was best. Um,
And for a little bit of context for people watching this either live or asynchronously later, yeah, so our affordable content grants that are managed through the library, they award faculty for the labor of conversion of a course into what we call a one, which is like our brand name for Open Nebraska Initiative status, which is either no cost, meaning it doesn't require the purchase of any materials, or low cost, which means that the total amount is less than $40, which is pretty standard for what these kind of cutoffs are. And that allows, I think, for greater flexibility in these sort of instructor projects, because oftentimes doing a purely Creative Commons licensed open educational resource adoption front to back isn't really that feasible yet for some areas. And so, yeah, I think the New York Times is a great example, like you were just saying, because students have full access to that through Chris Library at UNO. And fundamentally, the Affordable Content Grant Program is a student success initiative. And so, yeah, from their perspective, if they don't have to pay for it themselves, then it's still having, I think, that that impact on student success. So yeah, kind of a mixture then of both links and then sort of Creative Commons licensed content when you could find it. Yeah, the New York, I know faculty over in the writing workshop have made good use of those kinds of subscription access as well. Just, especially if you're doing, like the New York Times Online and Historical. I mean, there's so much stuff there. So that's awesome that you were able to use that. Tom, what did your process look like then?
Well,
Was
it
there
was
first
it
was
was
there
similar. I'm sorry.
replacing? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
it was similar to Jill's in that I was having my students buy a book that cost over $100 and feeling very guilty about it, especially since it was a writing book for STEM students, which to me seemed like they were not really excited about doing. And then I found out after teaching it, because like I said, I began as a graduate student in my first year, and finding out that most students just couldn't afford it or didn't want to spend their money on it. So the book that I was using, and it was the book that I was told to use because I took over, when the woman who was teaching the class retired. And the book was Technical Communication. And again, it's a great book. It's amazing. It's very glossy. It has everything you would ever want to know about technical writing. But as I became more comfortable teaching the class and it became my class and not a class I was just, kind of being a robot teaching, then I realized that this doesn't need to be in the room, so to speak. And so in my, when I was a TA, I required the book. But then once I started becoming teaching it part-time after I graduated from the English department, I said, you know what, I'm not going to require this book. And at first I made it optional, and I said, you can purchase it and bring it to class, and it will supplement the lectures. And that's usually how it works with the book. But then I got tired also of teaching from the book, and I wanted to expand my horizons because I had never taught technical writing. So everything that I learned was very quick. It was a crash course in teaching technical writing, and I read the book, and I was teaching from the book. However, I quickly learned that there are so many sources out here that I can look for, and I began doing that on my own as a part-time instructor. And I eventually learned about Grammarly, and I learned about all of the websites that are out there that really are what I'm talking about in technical writing and in writing in general. And so I began to refer more to those while still keeping the book and the lectures, but not requiring them to buy it. And eventually, once I was hired full-time by the College of IS&T, I decided that I'm going to find a different book. And I didn't have a clue where to look, although I had, eliminated the requirement for them to buy a book, but I did want them to have something. And so after I received the OER grant, I had a one-day workshop, which we met over at the library at the time. This was pre-pandemic. And we sat in a room in Chris and just for a few hours searched for things. And I found a book, and I now use technical writing online, which I found through the Creative Commons, open source, completely free for anyone to use. And from that, I said, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to do. And so I made that book available to all of my students, and I do every time I teach the class. And so that has been where my journey has been with OER. I also believe that it's very important because, again, not all students can afford this book. So that became a real strong impetus for me to do this. But also just because I didn't want to, as an instructor, get stuck in the route of just doing the same thing and the same thing. So I want to be not only a teacher, but also a learner, and completely know that there's other stuff out there and make my course more exciting and viable. And I will also say one last thing. There are horrible things that happened in the pandemic to education and to the world in general. But one good thing was when the Office of Digital Learning started offering classes for everyone to become better online teachers. which was amazing for me. I took every class. I now got all kinds of, fun little badges to show my completion of all of the courses. And my Canvas course now in my online teaching, I believe, is great. And my students love it. And I do teach an online only class as well as 3 in-person sections. But it's been a great journey. And I would really encourage everyone just to keep looking. Don't get stuck in one book. It's not necessary. There's so much more.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think also when mentioning the workshops that digital learning does, and I think it's a great bit of advice also for people who are watching this who are perhaps running or thinking about starting their own grants programs, is that there are allies on campus whose work and their goals often dovetail with these kind of initiatives. And so our affordable content grants program is supported also by a number of stakeholders. We do a lot of work in cooperation with digital learning. We get support from the kind of parent organization of that, the Innovative and Learning Centric Initiatives under Dr. Lindbergh now is what it's called, and also General Education and Dual Enrollment, Matt Tracy over there. And it's been a matter of, it's running these kind of programs shouldn't be isolated, shouldn't be siloed. There are going to be natural allies. There's people who are doing work, again, that their goals will dovetail with your own. And so why work alone when you can be working together and making use of that expertise? Before I get into, and you led me actually into a couple questions down the line, which was sort of like talking about, being able to customize your course and make your course your own, which is a response I often get for faculty. But real quick, and particularly Jill, then, because you're providing a lot of links to individual pieces that are no cost for students to access, but require kind of a link to get to. Do you have a workflow then that you've developed to regularly go in and do link checking then, or is it more of a matter of if a link is down, you'll find kind of the new one or a different option, or how do you approach that?
That's a good question. I know at the beginning of the semester, if I copy my course over, it will tell me what links are dead. So I guess that's where you start. A lot of stuff I've embedded to the degree that I can, just because then it's easier. And I also like students to manipulate the readings I assign to them in some way, usually annotate. And so I provide it in PDF or in Word document when I can, which is most of the time. And so I haven't had a huge problem with that, but yeah, it's something you've got to check. You've got to make sure your links are active. But I find myself finding new stuff. I mean, I teach argument, right? It's Comp 2, it's argument. And so I want to pick the arguments or the texts that are, super new, really hot topic-y stuff that students are going to like. And so I'm changing it all the time anyways. Which is fun. And that's why I like being able to do OER, because I'm not stuck with the texts that are in the book that I feel obligated to make students read since I made them pay for it. I can find out what students are interested in. I can find things that I think are interesting. And it just makes things more fun. And I should add something Thom said about working with digital learning. After I made my OER course, I had the course reviewed. And let me tell you, I thought my course was organized or nice. I thought it looked good. It looked good to me. I'm not any type of pro, but I am sort of a perfectionist. And no, the advice they gave me to make everything streamlined and how it should look and how things could be formatted. I mean, my course is so much better than it was before. And that is one of the most productive things I think I ever did, was that course review. because I didn't even know what was possible in terms of making it easy for students to use. And now in my evaluations and in my fully online class, I get that a lot. Like, oh, I really liked the way you set up your Canvas. Oh, it wasn't me. It was Cassie in instructional design, but thanks.
I agree. I also want to mention on that accessibility is extremely
Mhm.
important. There's a course that they offer that is devoted solely to making your classes accessible. And it's not just for the online, it's also for in person if you teach those.
Yeah, that and I've also taken Marlena's humanizing online course, right, which is all about trying to put that human element back into online teaching
Right.
to the extent possible. And yeah, you're when you actually work on a course with like professional instructional designers, right, it's such a great experience because um yeah, they have ideas and insights and observations that are things that wouldn't have occurred to me on my own. And so that's also been, you know, it's a huge benefit again of finding these natural allies, I think, because um, they have expertise areas that I don't, right?
Yeah.
And so it's been fantastic in that regard. Um, I want to talk about vetting a little bit. So, you know, you've assembled these resources and then I would imagine, you know, like in the case of, you know, Jill, like if you're finding like a great piece of writing from like a flagship publication, right? Then, you know, that's okay, great. I how much though, sort of like what's the vetting process like? And then Tom, you found a CC licensed book then.
Mhm.
Um, what was your vetting process like? Kind of like, you know, so like you've kind of found your draft list, kind of how do you go through those and really determine, I guess, sort of quality and relevance and suitability?
Yeah. When I was moving my Comp 2 class to OER, I was hoping to convince the whole department to go in that direction. And so I had a team of people who were collecting sources that they thought were good and were looking through them. And so that made it a lot easier for me. But if you're doing it as an individual, it is a little bit time consuming, right? You have to look at the sources. You have to decide if they're exactly what you want, or maybe they're just part of what you want. Um, so I mean, I think it can be time consuming. But it's worth it once you find the right thing.
I think that for me, the book that I found, which was a really great find, and it was honestly the only one I found that focused on technical writing. Um, I first of all noticed the comprehensiveness of what this author had put together. Look through, I mean, the book is put together just like a print book and a bound book with chapters, and everything is there that is covered in the technical communication book that I was using. So I just started reviewing all of the chapters. It's well written. I didn't find any grammatical errors. And so I established the ethos. See, there's a comp two. And I use this on my students to show that yes, it does come back. The ethos of the writer and what is being presented in the book. And that to me was all sufficient and acceptable. And so I'm happy that this is a source that is available for me to use. Now, in terms of any of the other sources, I absolutely always check out the website, and I am pretty confident saying anything I post from Grammarly is going to be credible and useful. Anything that I post from Scribr, which is another great site for technical writing, is going to be acceptable. Or I could also say, give a little plug to MIT. They have the Mayfair Handbook of Technical Communication or Technical Writing, which is free for everyone. It's a big PDF. It's another kind of OER source that I found, although that existed long before I had ever started thinking about OER. So that's my process, is just to look at what is the content of the material, and if it lines up with my knowledge of what I want to teach, and also compared to other things that I have looked at. That's how I vet.
Okay. Um, Early on in kind of the OER movement, and perhaps less so now, but and this was also a concern, I think, that was more frequently for a time, again, perhaps less so now, raised by people who were thinking about online education and online materials, was this worry that consumption of material in a purely electronic format um, was going to have different outcomes than sort of the tried and true print. Um, I think I hear that less now, but probably, well, one, there's just been more examples of people doing it successfully. Two, students now kind of have grown up more in a digital environment where they're more used to that. Has that been y'all's experience in teaching and in doing this kind of transition? Did you notice any difficulties in kind of student retention and learning in moving to online resources?
Well, I will say that all students learn differently, that there is always going to be a student who would prefer to have a book in front of them. I actually love books and I prefer to have a book, but as you say, we are in a digital age. And the best thing for me was to learn how to do both. To take the knowledge from that book, which I still use. I still use the knowledge that I learned from the technical communication book, but then find a source that is all digital, like the book that I currently use, and hopefully that will transfer over. And then again, finding the links, the websites, the videos, very helpful, because yes, here's a Maggie Christensen term, the more multimodal you can be, the better. And I think that engages the students more. And that's really the point, in my opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I do not think having online, not having a physical textbook has been bad for my students. I think it's been great because, one, they don't always buy the physical book, right?
So,
And that's just the reality. And it's actually more students than I think you would think that don't buy the book. And so they have access to it, and you can choose readings that are current that students might think they might be interested in. And you can make it multimodal, right? Like I used to, when I had the textbook and I was teaching rhetorical situation, for example, it was like, okay, read the chapter. And do students really do that? Yeah, maybe if you give them some sort of assignment that goes with it.
yeah,
But even then, not always, right?
yeah.
And so now I can do things like, oh, why don't you watch this video or do this Kahoot or annotate this reading.
Yeah.
And so there's just so many more ways that I can encourage students to engage, being multimodal, being picking readings. Really, the trick that I found is that if you pick a reading that students are going to think is interesting, then they're more likely to read it.
Yeah.
And so, no, I don't think having things online has been a problem at all. I think it's actually increased engagement in my classes.
And I
Not that
would also,
I like a book too, but no, I don't think.
Jill, you and I, you said we graduated kind of the same time. So I think that also is in our mindsets more than,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I've heard the argument, oh, students retain better when they read from a physical book, and there may be research to back that argument up. But I also think that when are these students, as they grow up and as they progress through their education and through their careers, when are they going to be presented with a physical book?
Right.
Maybe
And
never. Maybe
yeah,
never. Honestly, I mean, unless they're, reading a novel for fun, maybe never. And so learning how to read online is an important part of literacy.
definitely. And I think also that there's just, um, no question that most students are going to only have their devices. They're only going to have their laptops or their phones or their tablets, or if there's a different device out there that I don't know about, which is very possible. Um, then we need to go to them. They don't come to us. We need to go to them. That's really the point, I think.
Cool. Yeah, those are fantastic answers. Thank you. You both mentioned this, and I wanted to dig into it a little bit more, but which is also frequently, one of the responses I get from faculty that I've worked with on these projects is kind of the joy of finding yourself free to customize your the flow and the schedule to be exactly what you want, right? To approach kind of this backwards course design kind of, I've got outcomes. Here's the things that I want to teach. Let's figure out how to hit that. Can you talk a little bit about that experience for you and what kind of customization you were able to do to really make the course your own?
Go ahead, Jill.
Okay. I honestly, and this is part of, I think, why I was so excited to go OER is I was already doing that before I even officially stopped making students buy the textbook, because I would find things, I'd be reading the Times and I would read something like, oh, my students would love this, or, oh, isn't this such a great example of pathos or whatever it is. And so I already was collecting, maybe not even on purpose. And I was starting to assign readings that were outside of the textbook anyways, to the point where I was like, maybe it's not ethical for me to have students be paying for this textbook, especially if it's not like if I'm just using it as a resource or supplemental. And so I'm losing track of the question. What was the
The joy of
Oh, joy of
customization.
customization. That's right. So
Yeah,
yeah, I like doing that. I think we
yeah,
all probably like
yeah,
doing that because you get to find the things that are going to work.
right. And it just makes us better educators when we can give our knowledge to our students in a way that isn't just feeding them from a book. Again, this whole teaching from a book, I'll return to that saying, which is fine for some subjects and for some circumstances and in context of that. But I don't believe that my job as a teacher would be as joyful if I only had to just because I'd be, again, a robot teacher, which I was. I mean, I will admit I was the first year I taught this as a TA, because I was following a very prescriptive form of information that was going out to the students. And when I was, teaching as a TA in the English department, it was pretty similar to that. So going beyond that, you find yourself as a teacher. You find your educational joy by not only teaching but also learning yourself and being a lifelong learner as a teacher. So yeah, and I love pictures and I love videos and I love being able to change the color in my Canvas courses and the fonts, all of that stuff. It's fun, so why would I not do that? Yeah.
Cool. What have student responses been like?
Pretty good. I think that I am always interested in student feedback. I not only for me to improve anything or for them to catch anything that I might have missed. I'm also a perfectionist and I'm very much angry with myself if I ever have a typo, that kind of thing. But the student feedback, especially for the all online courses, has been, like you said, Jill, just gotten comments. It's a great design. The structure of the class, I've gotten good feedback because it's just very useful. I mean, I try to be very practical. And, also, of course, engaging them right away in their critical thinking skills and trying to really make that point that you have to use your critical thinking And going back to something you said earlier about AI, you would think that there would be much more conversation about AI and writing in the place where I work, the College of ICT, and there is, but from the very beginning of my class, we spend a little bit of a class period, not an entire class period, talking about generative AI. And I say very clearly, you are required to do your own writing. That's the only thing I can say because, it's an honor code. It's something that I have no way of seeing if they let ChatGPT write anything. Although I really try to gear my writing prompts to be more original than something they could just ask ChatGPT to do. So yeah, and I think I've now lost that conversation or that question.
Yeah. Oh, it was student reception.
Right.
Yeah. I think, well, one thing that's really important to me as an educator, it's a big part of my teaching philosophy, is giving students choice as much as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, last week, or a couple weeks ago now, I was doing a lecture on inductive versus deductive reasoning, right? Just a intro to logic. And I said, okay, you're going to do this Kahoot quiz in class, for fun, not necessarily graded, but you need to learn the difference. So here's a textbook chapter you could read. Here's a video that explains it that you can watch. Here's like a PowerPoint that you can go through, and students just latch on to the resource that they latch onto. And maybe they're looking at all three of them, but not necessarily. Or I say, okay, I want you to do a rhetorical analysis. And my assignment was looking at a rhetorical analysis of websites instead of texts, but here's 12 different, ones you could look at. And so my final paper, they choose their own topic. And so I can really differentiate and provide choices when it's OER because I'm not tied down to anything, right? I can do more options, and students like that. They like to feel like they have some sort of autonomy or power over the way that they learn.
Mhm. Yeah, digital learning is doing a new course starting on the 18th at HighFlex, which I had never heard the term before. And I looked it up and it's like, yeah, that's really what I'm actually trying to do, hybrid flexible courses where students choose what is their best learning method.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited for that. It's just a 3-week course, but it starts
Oh,
soon.
yeah, I should do that.
I think that ties beautifully in with OER.
Yeah, and
Keep giving plugs to digital learning.
I give to them all the time. I
Yeah.
mean, and again, to reiterate for anyone watching this asynchronously later, most universities will have a center for teaching excellence, a center for faculty development, a center for teaching development, something like that. Make use of them. They're an incredibly valuable resource, and they frequently have a lot of training, and they do this professionally, and they think about this professionally. So it's I can't sing their praises enough. So yeah, I am a standard bearer. Frequent plugs. Cool. Well, last question then. This has flowed really, really well. Uh, Speaking to the hypothetical composition instructor out there who is thinking about doing this kind of project, what is your number one best piece of advice that you've gleaned from your experience in doing this that you would give to somebody?
Okay. I think the best piece of advice is to talk to people, to not try to do everything yourself. If you want to do composition, I have a whole OER course shell, and it has tons and tons and tons of things that you can look at. You could talk to me, you can talk to your colleagues, because a lot of times people have a favorite reading or a favorite article that they're using already that isn't a favorite assignment. And so I think the more that we can collaborate, we're not afraid to go to digital learning and have them review our course. We're not afraid to try something new. That's going to be the best. mean, I think just don't be afraid to reach out and try new things and collaborate.
Yeah. And I would say don't limit yourself. Don't think that you have to follow a prescriptive format for your teaching, although there are things that absolutely you have course learning objectives. You have to make sure those are met, but you also have to let yourself be a critical thinker and let yourself enjoy what you do and love what you do. And that includes finding things that you can bring into your course to enrich this experience for your students and for yourself. Because if your students see that you're engaged and your students see that you care, they're going to care. And that's really what I always try to do with all my classes.
Yeah, that bit of advice about, talk to your colleagues and find other people who might already also be doing this kind of work. I mean, I think that goes part and parcel with the idea of, finding the sort of campus ally stakeholders, but then also, I mean, when you're doing this kind of work, you're joining a community of practice. And, that's also part of the philosophy of the kind of work of open education, right? And so, yeah, be collaborative, seek out advice, talk to people. It's a detriment to your project to not do so.
Yeah,
And then
I use you as a co-teacher in one part of my class with the research section. So
yeah,
I say that to my students. They said, okay, so our STEM librarian really is the expert in this section that we are now moving into. You must contact him. You must ask him if you have research needs. And I know that the STEM librarian is a resource for my class. So absolutely, finding someone who will be able to integrate into your class, I guess.
yeah, and your point too, Tom, about just keeping in mind to not limit yourself. That's doing these kinds of projects really kind of, I mean, it expands the possibilities of what you're doing so greatly, that you can frequently find tools, exercises, approaches that might not have been possible before or might not have occurred to you before, and can be very valuable once you find them. So yeah, both great pieces of advice. That's all the questions that I had. This was super smooth. I think this was the smoothest conversation that I've yet had with adopters in this series. Thank you both so much for your feedback and sharing. And yeah, if you want to get in touch with Thom or Jill to pick their brains about things, you can find them easily through the UNO website,
Absolutely.
or get in touch
Yeah,
with me,
definitely.
and or get in touch with me, or if you're not at UNO, again, there are going to be people who you can reach out to for advice and for help, and kind of join that community of practice and community and learning. So thank you again for showing up today. I'll post this video probably later today once I do a little bit of editing to it. But aside from that, yeah, I really appreciate it, and I'll see y'all around campus, hopefully.
Yeah.